All right, so welcome to week 3 of the Einstein Trust Layer. Tiffany Joseph will be presenting today, so I will hand it off to Tiffany.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you for just coming and being here. I really love that we've made this commitment to each other. It's so fun to walk this path with you every week. In case you missed a session and are catching up, I've made sure to start off with some context so that you feel comfortable picking up and continuing along, because this is going to be the last week that we cover the Einstein Trust Layer. Forward-looking statement. Customers shouldn't be making buying decisions based on products that are commercially available. Please don't make any decisions on any forward-looking statements made in this presentation. And we created this for a study group to prepare for the cert, so I don't work or represent Salesforce. So week 3, we're going to cover the response part of the Einstein Trust Layer. And I'm going to try to complete the circle that was started by Joyce and Meredith and see some bonus material. So to get you comfortable, week 1, Joyce covered the start of the journey with the prompt. We covered how the prompt flows from the CRM apps and different tools through the Einstein Trust Layer to an LLM and back again to the trust layer before being presented to the user. So we covered the secure data retrieval, the dynamic grounding, the data masking, and the prompt defense. And these are all actions Salesforce performs to protect sensitive data before being sent to the LLM. In our second presentation, we discussed the response generation, which is where the LLM you choose generates a response using the prompt. And today we're going to talk about the response. And in some documentation, you're going to see this as the generation. So I think they started using generated response and then changed it to response, just so that you have that as a note as you're looking through documentation. And this is commonly referred to as the response journey. And it's when the generated response comes back into the trust layer and back to the app or tool that the user was using to use the prompt feature. So understanding this piece is where the confidence comes in being able to describe how Salesforce specifically protects sensitive data while still leveraging generative AI tools. So to begin, here's an example of a prompt as prepared in Salesforce before data masking is applied. Here we can see, and I'm going to point out, here's my little tool, the role of the sender itself, and the company they work from. And how do I clear this? I think I'm going to stop doing this. And also the name of the customer and the company that they work from. So we can see that it's clearly specified, and this is how the user prepared their prompt, or how the prompt was created through Agentforce. When it comes back from the language model, this is what comes back into Salesforce. We can see that the placeholders that Salesforce inserted when it's sent to Salesforce are here. I'm sorry. So once the prompt is created, Salesforce removes the sensitive data, and then it's passed off to the LLM. And I want to call out the placeholders in yellow. So now that it's sent to the LLM, now we wait for our response. Where's my next slide? Go, next. Thank you. So, where is it? Yeah. So the response still contains blocked and masked data. And it is what is returned back from the trust layer, but it's not ready for the user to see. So it still needs to go through some processes and policies before it is shown to the user. As an admin, you can review the response returned from the LLM. If you want to go and see that data, you would need Data Cloud reporting to see that. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that the response is safe and useful. Well, here's our response. So this is what came back from the LLM. We have an email drafted from the point of view of the account executive. We can see the title at the bottom. We can see the placeholders for the person that the email was written to and the name and the company of the person that wrote the email. Like I said, that previous response wasn't ready for the user to see yet. So we're going to have toxicity detection do its job. The generated response is scanned for toxicity. So it screens both the user inputs and the AI generated inputs for inappropriate content, helping to prevent the spread of harmful or offensive language in your Salesforce org. It produces a confidence score, which is important to understand. The Salesforce assessment tool provides a score from 0 through 1, 1 being the safest for toxicity, and it evaluates on 4 categories. So it'll give a score between 0 to 1 on violence, profanity, biased, and racial language. And if the score is between 0 and 1, if the score is between 0 and 0.5, it is considered toxic. Salesforce also gives a second score based on safety. And if the score is between 0.5 and 1, it is considered safe. So there's 2 scores, 1 for toxicity, 1 for safety. And it is the inverse calculation. Think of 1 as the most, and think of 0 as none. So if you're looking at toxicity, if the score is closer to 1, it is very toxic. If you're looking at safety, if the score is closer to 0, it is safe. These scores are stored in Data Cloud. So if you want to look at these individual ones, you will need to get Data Cloud to look at it. Now, I think I turned myself around in trying to explain it. So I included a visual to help everyone. So here is a prompt that was sent through service reply recommendations. The prompt response came back, and we can see that it is before the data has been rehydrated into the response. We can see the toxicity score here and the safe score here as a guide, and the different categories that were rated for this response. The aggregate score was 0.2, and so it determined that this response was safe.
I'm sorry, can you go back to that slide? I'm just trying to understand where it was biased.
So bias, I would say bias is it's trying to sell something. So in this response, we have, they're talking about the customer's credit card. And in the last sentence, it's asking if it can tell you more. Sorry, I think the tone is more towards selling the credit card offerings. And that's where I think the bias is in this response. I had the same question you did.
Maybe it's the credit minimum score required. I mean, I don't know. Because anyway, you were saying you had the same question, but you came to that thought.
Yeah, I really tried to deep dive into this because it did confuse me. I got this slide from the AI certification prep deck. And this is really as much as they touched onto it.
Okay. All righty. Well, thanks for stopping here.
No worries. Let's continue.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I had more here. So since we stopped, let's just make sure that I've shared all the information I have.
I thought of a way to remember the whole, so toxicity being one, there's like, he's very toxic, she's very toxic. That would be like an increase. And then as far as the safety, I don't know if you all have ever done like construction companies and they're always like 0 recordables. Okay, sorry, that would be the opposite then. 0 is not safe. So,
I wish they had a scale where they had safe,
yeah,
like toxic on one side, safe on the other, and a sliding scale. I think that would have just been just the clearest visual possible. And 0.5 is the middle mark. So top of 0.5 is safe, under it is toxic. And I think that's really what we need to remember in terms of toxicity detection.
oh, I like that.
The categories are important. So the violence, profanity, bias, and racial, those are important. And I think that those actually would be called out as a question in the exam, like a multiple choice, which of these are or which of these aren't. I searched high and low, but I found it. I really wanted to find an example of what it would look like as a report in Data Cloud. And this was the best slide that I could find. But here we can see the actual response text that was returned from the LLM, the category that it it's triages into, and then the actual value. So if you really wanted to dig into the data, you have the raw data available and you can use it to train. The trust model, the trust layer, will protect for many languages that we use. So here we see multi-language and region support. French, English, Spanish, Italian, Japanese are supported, but I would be careful with regional idioms. So I live in Canada. I live in French-speaking part of Canada. The documentation calls out specifically that French Canadian is not supported. And knowing that nuance of swear words or different turns of phrase might not be caught by the LLM, and those might pass through the toxicity model. So as you're working through this, if you're working with customers that are maybe Spanish in different parts of the world, Mexico versus Chile, and you know that there's some people in Chile that have a turn of phrase that's offensive that isn't part of the general textbook Spanish, that might be something you might want to be aware of as you're looking through your prompt responses. We're still not ready to show that to the user yet. We need to rehydrate the placeholders that Salesforce inputted once it's sent it to the LLM back so that the user can read the information. That's called data demasking. If you notice in the example, there was a data type, so person's name, person two. So you still saw the relationship of these are two different people and the company that they were associated with. So there were cues for the LLM to understand and detect what was the type of data it was working with. But when it's demasking, there's two methods that it uses. So the first one is the model-based detection. The model can identify specific types of data, but Salesforce also uses regex patterns, which we're already familiar with. So think email addresses, phone numbers, those kinds of tools are also used to figure out the context patterns of words to give you a confident response in what you're asking for. And so here's our rehydrated email. John Smith's name, the customer, his name has been inserted at the top of the email, and the person that wrote the email is at the bottom with the company that they wrote it from. So the sensitive data is replaced. This response has gone through the toxicity detection. We just satisfied the data demasking, and we have audit and feedback that come next. But at this point, the user reviews the response before sending it to the customer, they can choose to accept it, edit it, or ignore it. Optionally, not shown in the diagram for the trust layer, is citations. If it is relevant and if it is applicable, Salesforce will include a citation link to where the data was found. And it's super helpful to help build the user trust and confidence and help eliminate hallucinations by being able to double check and go back and see that original source that it came from. I have an example, and this is the same service reply that we saw earlier. It is the response that was before the data demasking was performed, but we can see a link, source, minimum requirements for Cumulus cards upgrades. So in this particular situation, the user can click on the source and go to the knowledge article that Salesforce used for generating this response. So depending on where the information is grounded, you would have it in the internal knowledge or even information from the LLM. It'll give you a link to the source. I have another one from Slack because I thought it was fun, and I thought, I don't really work with Slack often, but it would be nice to have a visual of where that's from. So here's a screenshot of Slack. And as you can see, the summary that was generated by Slack AI has little footnotes in square brackets. So 1 and 2. And once you click on that, it'll bring it to the source that fed that, that information to help generate that response. Now we're at the audit trail and feedback. So Salesforce saves information about the response that was returned back to the user when the prompt was submitted to the LLM. It stores the original prompt, the masked prompt, the toxicity detection scores, and the original output from the LLM and the demasked output. So you can see all of these side by side. In Data Cloud, you have control over how long this data is stored, but Salesforce stores it for 30 days for compliance purposes. From looking at the information, I think in terms of studying for the cert, I think this is sufficient to know. But if you wanted to dig deeper, the Data Cloud reports really help protect you from sensitive data, from exposure to the large language models. You don't want your customer data to train the model. So an example of reportable data is like the masked prompt. So the prompt that gets sent out to the LLM, you could see the actual prompt, so you can match it up to the instructions and the topics that you generated. And then you can see the response that comes back, masked or unmasked, so you can compare and contrast and tweak and make improvements. To do this, and I have screenshots of this, you need to turn on AI data collection, and there's also a report package you can install. So monitoring the metrics, there's a dynamic dashboard that is available, and this is all you get. You get the data masking. Sorry, why did that? Oh yeah, data masking by feature, trends in topic responses, categorized in the different categories, and then trends in topic responses by feature over 7 days, 30 days, and for all time. These are built off of 2 reports: toxicity detection in responses and masked prompt and response. I have a screenshot here of the feedback framework that is presented to the user when the prompt is returned to the customer. Sorry, is returned to the user. So as a response. So the response is shown to the user, and they can accept and edit or give feedback. There's a qualitative feedback form of a thumbs up or a button. And if the response wasn't helpful, they can specify why. The feedback is collected and you can review it, and it's also sent back to Salesforce to improve the quality of the prompts. The hardest part about all of this is setting up the Einstein Trust Layer. You want to go to setup. You want to go to Einstein setup. You want to go to the generative AI menu. And then you want to toggle on the button that says turn on Einstein. You can see the options for configuring the Einstein Trust Layer settings. There's a note that you may want to refresh the page. And then once you refresh the page, you'll be able to see what you can send to the language model for training. This is what you would see. So remember when we were talking about rehydrating the data and how the model can know what type of data is being sent? Here is some things that you can control in terms of what you want to send or not send, or what is sensitive, what is masked when you send it to the model. So we have name, email address, phone number, credit card, social insurance number. If you know that you're going to be using passport information and you want to have that protected, you can also do that here. To turn on the toxicity detection for prompts, that's in the same place. Setup, Einstein Trust Layer, click Safety and Security, and you toggle on toxicity detection in prompts. At the time this screenshot was taken, it was in beta, but I don't think it's in beta anymore. I might be corrected. We'll just verify that when we check. And that's it for the Einstein Trust Layer. I have some quiz questions. Do we want to stop for some questions before we review the quiz questions that I prepared?
Sure, sounds good.
All right, maybe they'll come. So I collected some quiz questions for us to go over.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
So you showed the setup, the Einstein Trust Layer setup, where you can select, I guess, which fields are considered sensitive data. So then when the user writes a prompt, are you saying like that the system automatically can tell that if you say, Karen Dubervet's had this question, like the system automatically sees, oh, that's a name. I know that's a name, so I'm going to cover that up. Is that kind of how that works?
Mm-hmm. And the email address would use like a regex pattern, like it would recognize an email address. And it would recognize credit card information. I think also the data type of the actual field is used as well. So I tried to get as much information about this as possible. It was a little difficult, very mysterious to lift up that shroud. But if you go down that rabbit hole, oh my gosh, I would love to know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So the first question, surprise, surprise, is really looking at the Einstein Trust Layer and identifying toxic responses. One thing that I found from looking at these practice questions is that the question will give you a clue as to where you are in the journey to help you determine the answer. So it's going to tell you whether you're talking about a prompt, whether you're talking about a response, or if it's external to Salesforce in the LLM. So I'll give you a moment to answer this question. Once I start seeing annoyed faces or responses, I will move on. There we go. We have some answers. I'll kick over to the answer. The answer is B. So this use case ensures that AI responses are ethical and free from harmful content. And this is, again, the safety score. So we have that scale of safe versus toxic. Closest to 1 is toxic. Closest to 0 is safe. What feature should be highlighted when a customer wants to ensure their data isn't retained outside of their organization? All right, we have some answers. The answer is C. Here's why. In the question, they're specifically calling out when the data is outside their organization. So when the data isn't retained outside of the organization, that's the clue. So the data masking is actually something that's performed internally within Salesforce. The zero data retention policy is what ensures when the data is outside of Salesforce, it's protected. So when thinking through this question, the way that I saw it was the general policy that makes sure that data doesn't go to the LLMs.
So Tiffany, you're saying like, I don't know if B is part of it, but like data masking, that was where my answer was. That's part of the zero data retention policy. Like those are some of the like features of it.
Yeah, but these questions are always meant to trick you.
Yes.
This was
That's why I jumped to A.
this was specifically pulled from the AI Cert Prep webinars. So this was a Salesforce generated question. And I really had to stop and think with this one when I saw this question as well. And that's how I thought through it.
I would say
When I also think when you're talking about broadly selling the solution to someone, right? Like when the feature should be highlighted when a customer wants to ensure. Data masking is the tool, but I think they're talking about the overall attitude, policy, vision.
I also, Tiffany, from what I've seen, like A and B, it's that internal user focus of what happens as a user with the tool versus the overall function of the trust layer in totality. Being C, being that zero. It doesn't matter. It's not like I could say, oh, I actually want to retain this data. That's not an option.
Yeah. I'm glad everyone struggled with this one as much as I did. I really had to noodle it. I have one more. Oh, I'm sorry that it's so grainy. Let me read this in case you can't see it. Which feature ensures compliance with regulations like GDPR by masking sensitive data? Redemption for Becky. So I think when we're looking at these questions, data masking is a feature. Whereas when we're looking at, oh, never mind. I can't even say that. But I think looking at the way that these questions are framed and just having confidence in understanding what's being asked will be critical when studying for this test. And that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. This was so fun to prep.
Nice work, Tiffany. You are such a good teacher, and I love how your mind works. And it's like that's why what makes you brilliant is you are technical, but you connect the dots for people. So thank you.
You're the best.
All right. Any other comments or questions before we stop the recording?
I had a quick one. Tiffany, would you mind bringing up the toxicity scoring thing again? I've studied this one and it confused the dickens out of me. And so there's one category for safety, right? And I think of one as meaning, yes, very, it's very this thing. And so if the safety category gets a 1, I believe that means, yes, it's safe. But then the other categories you showed there, I think those are all toxicity. And if you get a 1 there, it means, yes, it's very violent. It's very perfect or whatever. Am I thinking of that properly?
I think they're trying to confuse us because the first time I read this, I thought it was just toxicity. And then the second time I went over it, I thought that there were 2 separate scores.
That's what
And
the
now
help
that I've
text looks like. That's
yeah.
what I'm confused. Like the help on Salesforce is like, yeah, you got the score for the safety category ranges 0 through 1, with 1 being the safest. The scores for all other categories indicate the toxicity in each category, 1 being the most toxic. So are these what they're talking about? The violent, profane, biased,
So
racial?
these are the different categories that they score on.
Okay.
And what I was frustrated about was I assumed that there, like in the way that you understood it, that there would be separate categories for safety. If I have indicators for toxicity, I must have indicators for safety.
Right.
When I was thinking that it was 2 separate scores. And this screenshot was from the cert prep from Salesforce, from the guy that does the AI stuff, the Spanish guy. And I watched it a few times just to try to clear that up. And staring at this deck for way too long. Like, why would there just be an aggregate score? Like, how is there? And that was my clue. The fact that there's
Right.
one singular aggregate score really helped me come to the conclusion that it's a scale with toxicity on one side, safety on the other. It's not 2 separate scores. It is
Okay.
1 score. 0.5 is in the middle. If it skews upwards of that, it's toxic. If it skews downwards of that, it's safe.
Okay. Okay. I think I can wrap my head around it. Thank you. I
I'm
agree.
thinking-
I agree. On a scale, it would have been much easier to understand this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that they're using the word most
Yes.
as also the word 1. So if it's the most, it scores 1, regardless of safety or toxicity. 1 meaning it's the most safe. 1 meaning it's the most toxic. 1 meaning most. It's
Yeah.
so weird. Am I?
Yeah. I'm just going to go into the cert looking at it that way and be like, all right, if any of the toxic scores have above the 0.5, it's.
Yeah, be critical. In the documentation, they only talk about the toxicity score. They don't talk about a separate safety score.
Yeah.
And I really spun myself around looking for the criteria for a safety score. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that it is 1 score. It is the aggregate score. And that is what determines whether it is safe or toxic.
But then I don't understand if the aggregate score is 0.2. I guess if it reaches a 1, it's the most. I don't know what to think. And I'm like, I'm still stuck on the bias thing. I used to work at a bank, so this actually really, really calls home. And I don't see any bias in telling somebody that there's a minimum credit score, but I do see a bias with telling somebody that they have trouble because you're putting words in their mouth. And they say it twice, and then biased is a 0.2. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. I'm just telling you what's happening in my brain, but that doesn't make it right.
I think what you're raising is so valid, but I also go through a process of this valid question. Do I need it to pass this test? And I think that question will be critical for developing prompts and making sure they're effective and making sure that that's correct. But I don't think that that's critical for passing the cert, if that makes sense.
It does. I just, when, it kind of makes you lack confidence when you can't fully grasp something or make sense of it. And that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. I'm just trying to understand, how are they employing the word most?
Yeah.
And the number 1 here.
Mhm.
So
So
I think that'll be a good one to study more on for me.
I can share the Vidyard link of the cert preps that were done, and he's done a few over the last few months. So you can go through different ways of him explaining it in different ways. In terms of visuals, this is the best that I could find. Maybe when we get into, because I really haven't done that much in terms of generating responses, maybe when we get into there, we can see more, or pull the data from the data cloud reporting. Personally, I want to play with some French Canadian profanities and see if I can trigger those toxicity scores and see how that works. but it's I think that's a very valid point. You're talking to something that you can't really explain.
Yeah. I'm also going to play with the Spanish words from the different countries that mean different things. It's going to be bad.
Yeah, I was thinking, on that Mike Wheeler course, he had a link to get a free data cloud instance. I think that's what you need, right?
It only lasts for like 24 hours.
Oh,
But you can sign up for another one. But
okay.
you want to sign up when it's time for you to sit down to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I did just do a little chat GPT to see if it could explain to me, like I'm a sixth grader, about the scoring, and I'll go ahead and upload it in the chat.
Any clarity, Mariah?
I don't know yet because I don't know yet. I'm just without judgment, without actually going through it and saying, oh yes, I'm just going to put up what the chat GPT response was in the group, and then I'm going to come back and analyze it later. That's, I guess, what I'm going to say.
Cool. You're a busy woman.
All right. Any other comments before I turn off the recording?
I have another question. So I know you showed that report and you said that requires data cloud to view that one report. What else here, if you're able to summarize on that level, what else from this presentation requires data cloud to be able to see it? I think you mentioned that at least another time, I thought.
It's the raw data. So it's specifically, let me go back to that. It's the raw data. So how many prompts, how many requests were sent to the LLM? What did you get back? Because when you set it up, you can choose which model you use. So you may want to test and say, I want to try this model. I want to try that model. And then you want to compare and contrast the quality of the responses. And I think, I'm not sure, I haven't looked into this, but it also might be something like one is less expensive than the other, or whatever setup you have, or even if you have your own model, just to compare costs. So if you want to compare the actual prompt that was sent with the placeholders and then what was sent back with the response, someone more technical might want to see the prompt with the placeholders, whereas someone that's a little bit more business-minded, supervisor level, would want to see the names inserted and they don't want to see the placeholders. You're going to see the toxicity scores by category. And then you're going to see what was sent back from the LLM and what was screened and what was put in. So there is a help article that I can navigate to. Hold on. Salesforce help response journey. And I'm just going to show you the click path so that you can find it easily. If you come to this help article, turned around. No, you want to actually search for toxicity. Here. So you have also timestamps, the source that it came from, and any values that it spit out. Audit and feedback data. I'm going to click on this one as well. And it's going to be the last link. This and the first one. So I'm going to click on the first one. And here you can see what you can actually report on in details. It's a shame because the
Okay.
feedback data itself, you need Data Cloud for. That's the user feedback, I think, is incredible, but you can really only report on it and see it if you have Data Cloud.
So you can give feedback without Data Cloud, but you can only like kind
The
of see
user
it and
will be
summarize it.
the user will be prompted for their feedback, and it's going to be held, and Salesforce is going to retain the data, and Salesforce will use that data. They'll hold it for 30 days, and they will use it to improve their performance. But if you want to see it, you need Data Cloud.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I uploaded just a little Google Doc that shows the full ChatGPT response because it cut off part of mine, and I put the link in the chat. And I put it in your folder that was the Einstein Trust Layer.
Thanks, Mariah.
Oh, it uses a bucket analogy. That's fun.
Everything I do is pretend I'm a sixth grader because that's when I started first using AI with my kids, and I needed to be able to have it really dumbed down for me. So
See, this illustrates two buckets, so two separate scores. But I've never seen.
Blending, but then
Yeah.
you blend it. I'm so confused. I'm gonna read this over and over.
and the final score that they give you is a 0.48, which says, it's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mariah.
Well, I hope I gave you guys something to noodle on in the little minutes you have in between your calls.
Good thing that we had this for a whole hour. I'm just saying.
All right.
Rita, I just
Tiffany's